There was a time when the Imperium of man was not just feared, but revered, a monolithic titan stretching across the stars, bound by fire, faith, and flesh. Entire worlds trembled under the weight of its boot, and trillions chanted the name of the Emperor like sacred breath. But what happens when that breath turns shallow? When the stars themselves whisper rebellion? When silence falls upon the Astronomicon and the God-Emperor's throne seems a little colder? This is not the end. It is the fracture before the collapse, the shudder in the cathedral glass just before it shatters. Somewhere in the frozen dark, among ash-choked voids and broken relics of forgotten glories, a truth moves, not in triumph, but in warning, in ruin, in echo. Tonight, you will not hear the tale of victory. You will feel the slow unraveling of something so massive, so ancient, it has never known fear until now. We are descending into the last breaths of a dying colossus, where even angels of death begin to doubt. And it begins, as it always does, not with banners, but with blood. If the shadows of the Imperium still stirs something in you, if the thrum of lost honor, forgotten heroes, and doomed glory calls your soul, then stay, subscribe, let the echo carry you further. Share this with those who still believe, even as belief itself crumbles. It wasn't a shrine world, nor a forge. It bore no relics, no saints, no great victories carved into its stone. Just another bloated agri-colony choked with rot, its once fertile plains gone dry, its sky yellowed with industrial haze. The crops wheat, restructured grox feed, protein slurry, grain still grew in rows. But they were brittle, brown, brittle like the bones of the men who harvested them. Even the administratum had begun to refer to the planet in oblique terms. A tithe world on borrowed time, a farm that had forgotten how to feed. But then came the bell. No one alive remembered when the manufacturum bell of the Selenac Central Voxspire had last rung. It was a relic, or so it was thought, just another sacred gearwork, sealed by the Adeptus Mechanicus, and long since deemed functionally symbolic. But in the deep hours before false dawn, a sound rose through the dust-choked valleys and corpse-littered trenches, unnatural and booming. Like the throat of the planet had remembered how to scream. The bell did not toll once, it tolled 13 times. Sergeant Milan Varick heard it first. He was half asleep, propped against a crumbling piece of hubreckage, his las rifle resting across his lap, muzzle covered with a repurposed sock to keep the acid sand from eating through the barrel. He blinked, thinking it was the Vox unit hissing again, just another flicker of white noise, another ghost in the machine. But the sound had weight. You could feel it in your teeth, in the cartilage of your nose. It vibrated the old war scars in his spine. The other guardsmen stirred. One vomited. Another began to pray aloud. A third, Jackson, the youngest in the unit, fired his weapon into the dusk, thinking they were under attack. They weren't, not yet. But the rats had already begun to flee the trenches. By noon, half the continent had heard it. By nightfall, the planet was broadcasting its own distress signal across 6 different Vox channels. Some were static-smeared emergency codes from decades ago. Others were thought to be mechanicus, diagnostic rituals, low binary chants, not meant to be broadcast at all. One signal, looping endlessly, simply read, "He rises beneath the roots." The Adeptus Mechanicus responded with silence. They had always been strange on Selenac Prime, even by Forge standards. Not a full-blown Forge world, but a minor subsidiary of the Valter. The priesthood operated out of an old manufactorum complex they called the Basilica under iron. Pilgrims weren't permitted inside. Neither were PDF commanders. Not even the planetary governor, who hadn't been seen in nearly 3 years, held clearance. But when the bell rang, the gates opened only once, only long enough for something to crawl out. Varric's unit, the 417th Selenac Line Infantry, jokingly referred to as the Dust Eaters, was redeployed to cliques east of the Manufactorum Ridge. Command said it was precautionary, just until the tech priests confirmed system integrity. But Varric had been a soldier since before Cadia fell. He knew the smell of a quiet panic. The locals were vanishing. Entire harvest teams gone. No screams, no blood trails, just empty suits, collapsed like puppets without strings. Voxlinks went dead the second you crossed into the valley. The light looked wrong. They're green, almost, but there was no source. 3 nights in, they found the first half buried in loam. Its flesh, soft as wet paper, cogitator nodes humming softly. It shouldn't have moved. It was missing most of its spine, but its vox grill whispered one phrase over and over: unprocessed, unsanctified, unshackled. The tech priests refused to approach it. They issued a purge order instead. It took 9 full Helgens to destroy the thin. At first, they thought it was just isolation sickness. Varric had seen it before men left too long under 2 suns and a dying moon, breathing filtered air and whispering scripture just to keep the silence out. But this was different. This wasn't madness creeping in. It was something old crawling out. The first to break was Jexon. The boy had always been jittery, always talking about his brother who'd died in the Tertian rebellions. Said he still heard his voice over the Vox sometimes. Ghost signal, they'd joked. Bad encryption bleed. But the night after the servitor Jexon started digging, just past 3rd watch, Vorik found him clawing at the soil near the ridge, hands bleeding, eyes wide with a kind of ecstatic horror. He wasn't speaking Low Gothic anymore. Not really, just murmuring a word no one else recognized. Meket, over and over. Meket, Meket. They restrained him, but not before he bit a chunk out of the Vox operator's ear and screamed that the veins under the world were black again. When dawn came, Jexon was gone. The restraints were still tied. His uniform was folded neatly beside them. His las rifle sat upright, balanced without support. He was never seen again by the 6th day. The crops had begun to bloom. It should have been a miracle. After decades of drought and yield rot, the fields around Manufactorum Ridge were now teeming with green. Not the brittle half-stalks of Selenax engineered feed, but thick, coiling growth spines and spined fruits, red-tinged flowers that pulsed like breathing lungs. The adepts tested them. No known DNA pattern, not even Xenos classified. One vine coiled itself around a servitor's wrist and refused to release until the limb was severed. The Mechanicus issued a localized quarantine and then retreated. Whatever they found beneath the basilica under iron, they didn't speak of it. No missives, no machine prayers. Their Vox links went cold. The gates shut again, and from the eastern ridge, the bell tolled again. This time, it didn't stop. It rang all through the day cycle, then into night, a deep, droning tone that scraped against bone and thought. Men began to bleed from the ears. Auspex units shorted out. Even the sun seemed to flicker. And then came the fog. It wasn't weather. The orbital SAT-scans proved that much. It rolled in too fast, too precisely curling around battlements, threading into bunkers, swallowing Vox towers like a tide of smoke with weight. It smelled like old oil and scorched parchment, like the air inside a forgotten reliquary. It clung to lungs. It whispered. That was the worst part, the whispers. They came when you were half asleep, drifting on stim come down, or fatigue hallucinations. Not language, not quite. More like memory, but not yours. Ancient, towering things made of stone and flame, walking through corridors beneath worlds, leaving behind glyphs that pulsed with intent. Dreams of the sky bleeding open, of golden statues weeping ash. Varric began waking with blood on his tongue. They tried to leave, pulled back to the second trench line, called in evac from the fleet above. No answer. The 17th Tank Battalion out of Hive Narcissus went dark mid-transit. Their last Voxping was a simple, panicked loop. It's not dead, it's just forgotten. That same night, something knocked on the bunker door. Not scratched, not slammed, knocked 3 times. Polite, like an old friend returning. They didn't open it. They sealed the bunkers, activated full combat protocols, prayed to the Emperor until their lips blistered. The knocks didn't come again, but in the morning, the Vox spire at Central collapsed into itself without a sound, no explosion, no seismic warning, just gone. Dust hung in the air like frozen breath. The bell finally stopped, and in its silence, Varric realized something horrible. The fog hadn't lifted, it had sunk into them. It wasn't that the sun didn't rise, Selenac Prime had to, still dragging themselves across the ashen sky like wounded gods, but time had begun to fold in on itself. Meals were missed, routines forgotten. Men stared too long into nothing. They slept with their rifles clutched to their chests and awoke screaming about dreams that weren't theirs. Old dreams, imperial dreams, things buried in the soil long before men learned to burn promethium. The fog never fully receded. It just became part of the world. Sometimes you could see shapes in its hull, spindly things that didn't move so much as exist differently, like the air around them had agreed to be shaped. No one dared shoot. Those who didn't make the same mistake twice. Command was no longer command. The Vox had degraded into ritual statics, so corrupted that even the machine spirit adepts had stopped trying to tune it. Instead, they began to chant with it, syncing their voices to the flickering binary, harmonizing, humming, they said. The static held coordinates, that if you listened long enough, you could hear the gears of the God Emperor's will aligning. The commissar of the 417th shot 2 adepts on the 7th night for heresy. On the 8th, he turned his bolt pistol on himself, and the adepts kept humming somewhere beneath the Manufactorum Ridge. The earth began to bleed, not metaphorically actual bleeding. The hills oozed a thick black ichor, too viscous to be water, too warm to be oil. It carried no smell, but it clung to boots and armor like regret. One trooper fell into a pool of it. They pulled him out within seconds, but his eyes were gone, hollow, burnt clean. No scream, just silence. He saluted the sky and collapsed without breath. The 417th began burning their dead without orders. No rites, no prayers, just fire. Then came the sound, not the bell. That was over now, mercifully. This was something older, something lower. It vibrated through the stone like a heart slowly waking up deep beneath the planet's crust. Not a mechanical rhythm, organic, hungry, alive, and with it came the movement from the perimeter bunkers. Varric saw it first, the earth shifting, not cracking, not breaking, moving, like muscle beneath skin. The fields around the manufactorum trembled, and the soil pushed upward in slow, steady waves. Roots tore from the earth and rethreaded themselves. Towers tilted as if nudged by some buried breath. Entire battlements sank for meters overnight, perfectly level, and something was rising, not from the manufactorum, but below it. A shadow had begun to stretch across the valley floor, not cast by light, not shaped by physics, just there. It was a suggestion of form, a pressure in the eyes, an idea made mass, and it was growing. One of the heavy stubber crews drew the Imperial Aquila into the dirt and set fire to it. Then they walked into the shadow and did not return. Varric stopped them the third time, issued threat of execution. But by then, there were only 23 guardsmen left of the original 200. He didn't know where the rest had gone. No screams, no bodies, just armor, sometimes left folded at the foot of a trench. A boot. It wasn't desertion. It felt like surrender when the tech priests finally emerged from the basilica under iron. They no longer wore their red robes. Their flesh was gray. Their eyes no longer augmetic, but glassy and pulsing. And they did not speak in code. They sang, not in binary, but in something deeper. A language that didn't sound like words, but places chambers without doors, vaults without memory, corridors that echoed with the footsteps of things too vast to kneel. It made your mind itch, that sound, like you were remembering a sin committed by someone else. Long before you were born, Varric opened fire. The tech priests didn't die. They just ... unfolded, and the shadow beneath the ridge took one more breath. What remained of the 417th fell back to the old grain silos near Hivespanner, a gutted shell of a city that once held 2 million mouths and now echoed with nothing but wind and machine noise. No orders came from orbit, no thunder from the fleet. The sky had turned to static, its stars blotted out by a veil that shimmered only when you looked away. The Vox emitted only one phrase now, looping endlessly in a voice that was not human. Soil remembers. Varric sat alone for hours, staring at the final data slate transmission from command. It was corrupt, but parts of it played through distorted Vox filters. Mentions of archaeo formations, ancient cavities. Even the Mechanicus archives labeled them non-terrestrial. Anomalies, a phrase used when something broke every known pattern but couldn't be declared xenos without triggering political unrest. They had dug too deep. That much was certain. But what they'd found was not new. It had waited, and now, like a wound, reopening, it was spilling. The fog thickened once more, but this time it moved with purpose. It slithered between buildings, crept through shattered vents, curled into helmets, and choked out prayers. Varric tried to burn it. Promethium didn't catch. Plasma flares fizzled on impact. One guardsman detonated a frag charge in panic. The blast cleared a brief circle, but the fog returned faster than lungs could fill with air. They began seeing the statues next. The first appeared outside, their silo compound massive, humanoid, wrong. No one had placed it there. No sound, no impact tremor. It simply was. 12 meters tall, vaguely shaped like a man kneeling, but with no face. The surface was not stone, not metal. When touched, it rippled, and if you listened closely, it seemed to breathe. They set charges around it at dawn. There were 3 more, each turned slightly, as if they had been watching in the night, and from the mist came the voices again, not whispers now, voices, voices, calling them by name. Each guardsman heard something different, a old lover, a dead brother, a long-forgotten mentor. Varric heard his mother. She'd died when he was 9, crushed under a failed load-bearing cogitator in a hab collapse. But he heard her voice, clear and perfect, calling from the fog with lullabies and lies. He bit through his tongue to drown it out. The troopers started drawing symbols. No one told them to. No orders, no demons, no visible corruption, just ... instinct. They etched them into armor, onto rifles, into the sand, with fingers bloodied to the bone. Perfect spirals, geometric mazes, symbols that looked like the Imperial Aquila, if seen through cracked glass and half-remembered dreams. When Varric tried to stop them, they didn't resist, they just smiled. 3 guardsmen marched into the mist that night, chanting. No screams followed. A 4th returned. He had no eyes, just smooth skin stretched over sockets. And he brought with him a message, spoken calmly, almost kindly. We are not your enemy. We are your memory. Varric shot him twice in the heart. He didn't fall. He bowed, and then he crumbled into a fine, black ash that smelled like burning myrrh and warm metal. That was the night the manufactorum finally split, not exploded split, like old skin cracking to reveal something new underneath. A vertical fissure, impossibly clean, right down the center of the structure. From within, it came no flame, no debris, only darkness, pure, endless, vibrating, not empty, but full of waiting. The bell began to ring again, though no tower remained to hold it. It rang not with sound, but with absence, an ache behind the ribs, a tremor behind the teeth. The soldiers collapsed where they stood, not out of fear, but as if invited, kneeling before a cathedral they could not see, arms outstretched, eyes weeping. Varric didn't kneel. He ran through the vines, through the screaming fog, through the trenches where bones now grew like roots, until his breath was knives and the stars above him flickered like dying embers in the warp. He didn't know where he was running, only that something behind him had begun to wake. Varric did not remember when his boots lost their tread. The ground beneath him had stopped feeling like soil. It pulsed, not visibly, not enough to trip sensors, but in the bones. Every step felt like moving across a buried lung, breathing, watching, listening. He reached the old Vox Relay Tower, Sigma 4, long abandoned, half swallowed by fungal growth and rusted promethium pipes. The relay had collapsed cycles ago during a hivequake, but the sub-basement still hummed with residual power. Or maybe that was just his mind now, fraying at the edges. He descended through cracked ferrocrete, his hands shaking not from fear, but from certainty. He knew as he reached the lower levels that something had brought him here, not with control, not with force, but with invitation. This place had always been here, waiting for him, or someone like him. The relay systems blinked erratically. Glyphs scrawled across cracked data slates, some in Gothic, some in Mechanicus code, and others in symbols he didn't recognize. But they recognized him. He felt them settle into the grooves of his mind like a forgotten language. It wasn't learning, it was remembering. In the center of the relay chamber was an altar. That was the only word his brain offered, though it looked nothing like anything from the ecclesiarchy. No skulls, no bones, just a monolithic slab of pale metal that seemed to drink light. It pulsed faintly white, then gold, then void on its surface. Varric saw images, not visions, memories, SELEN, prime. Before the Mechanicus, before the tithes, before the Imperium, a garden world, then a vessel, then a prison, not for men, not for Xenos, but for something else. Something forgotten because it had to be. Something interred, not out of hatred, but reverence. Or fear, he stumbled back. The altar did not follow. It simply remained, like it always had. As if the world had been built around it. The Vox chatter surged, suddenly pure signal, for the first time in weeks. Crystal clarity, but not from command, from orbit. A deep, synthetic voice filtered through static and dust. This is Custodian strike cruiser, Aegis Sol. Perimeter breach confirmed. Code Thetis 7 Sepulchre. By authority of the Emperor, planetary sterilization protocols are authorized. Prepare for atmospheric incineration. Varric blinked, then screamed. There were still civilians, still soldiers, still lives. He tore at the Vox controls, broadcasting every frequency he knew, screaming coordinates, screaming names, screaming anything, but no one answered. No one could. The fog had sealed the planet, like a lid on a sarcophagus. He climbed back toward the surface, desperate to warn anyone still breathing, but by the time he reached the silo line, the sky had already begun to split. Not burn, split. A line of fire carved down from the heavens, precise and slow orbital lances, the kind used to destroy exterminatus-grade plague worlds or demon-infested forge cities. The kind you used when a planet no longer deserved saving. The Manufactorum Ridge was the first to go. No explosion, just light. Blinding and beautiful. A column of white fire that rose not upward, but inward, as if space itself had been pierced and was bleeding backwards. Varric collapsed to his knees, not in surrender, but in awe, because from that pillar of fire came not destruction, but silence, total, deafening, a silence that ate the sky. The statues did not melt. They turned, watching the light. And for a moment, just a moment, Varric saw something beneath the ridge. Not a creature, not a god. A shape towering, coiled in time, covered in runes, older than language. It looked at him, not with hate, with recognition. And then it was gone, swallowed in the blaze. The fog lifted, the stars returned, and Varric was alone. It was a Vigil-class Custodian strike cruiser, forged in the black vaults of Luna beneath the sacred bronze eyes of the Fabricator General himself. Its hull bore the scripture of the God Emperor etched in gold-trimmed adamantium. Its corridors echoed with solemn footfalls. Never panic, never doubt. It was a blade, pure and unflinching, carved from the bones of forgotten angels and sharpened against the eternal dark. And yet, something had followed them from Selenac Prime. The void around the ship shimmered unnaturally, not with warp flux, but with something colder, older. The navigators reported no anomalies. The cogitators showed green on all decks. And still, the stars outside flickered brief, subtle moments where whole constellations seemed to vanish and return without explanation. The Mechanicus called it a sensor glitch. The Custodes called it. Neither were wrong. Neither were right. Inside the Sanctum Primaris, shielded by walls 2 meters thick and lined with null wards, Custodian Arion Valkar knelt before a reliquary of Terran soil. It was ancient, sealed behind crystal quartz, dug from beneath the golden throne itself. A reminder, a weight Valkar had not spoken in 64 years. Not because he'd taken a vow of silence, but because there had never been cause to speak. His blade, his eyes, and his presence were enough. But now, kneeling in the cold glow of dying starlight, he found himself whispering, not prayer, confession. He had seen the shadow, not with his eyes, but with something deeper, some reflex honed long before he was reshaped by the gene rights of the Emperor. A primal knowledge. On Selenac Prime, in the seconds before the orbital lance struck the ridge, he had felt it. Not chaos, not warp. Origin, something not born, but remembered. A memory the galaxy itself had tried to bury. A presence not tied to faith or mutation, but to silence. And now that presence was aboard, he stood. The corridors of the Aegis Soul were empty, as they always were. Custodians did not gather unless summoned. The ship's skittery complement reduced to a dozen remained in stasis unless deployed. Even the servitors here were few and tightly leashed. This was not a place of life. It was a cathedral with engines. But as Valkar moved toward the navigator's sanctum, he felt the air shift. The lights dimmed imperceptibly, like a breath being held. The hum of the Geller field grew louder, not failing, straining. He opened the sanctum doors with a gen seal. The navigator was dead. Her body was untouched, seated calmly in her grav throne. Her third eye closed. No trauma, no corruption, just stillness. Her skin was pale blue, her lips curled into the faintest smile, as if she had finally heard a question answered on the deck beneath her. Scratched into the plasteel with a nail or claw or thought was a single word: Mekit. Valkar stared at it. He had heard that word before, not from a heretic, not from an enemy, from the Vox recording of Sergeant Milan Varick, the last known survivor of Selenac Prime. The data slate containing that transmission was now locked inside inquisitorial custody. But Valkar remembered. He remembered because he had felt it when Varick spoke, the weight of it, not a name, a title, a warning. The stars outside blinked again. This time, they did not return. And somewhere deep in the ship's lower decks, something ancient began to hum. That was the first lesson bred into Arion Valkar, long before he was given the spear and the silent oath. Fear was weakness, but observation, that was survival. The Imperium did not endure because it crushed its enemies. It endured because it remembered, because it watched now in the echoing silence of the Aegis Soul. Valkar began to observe the things that should not be. The ship was drifting, not off course, not wildly, but in micro-adjustments that did not align with any flight commands issued by the bridge. The helm servitors responded with compliance, but when he reviewed their command logs, the source of each course correction was absent. No origin, no approval, no trace. The Mechanicus priests, aboard 3 senior magi, bound directly to the Red Sanctum, confirmed it with absolute detachment. No command, no error, trajectory, self-resolving, as if the ship were remembering where it was meant to go. Decks once unused were becoming active. Lights flickered on in corridors sealed for centuries. An ancient reliquary chamber, long archived as non-essential, now pulsed with power. And the hum he had heard, the low vibratory tone echoing from deep within the engine cathedral, was increasing in rhythm. Not loud, not aggressive, like a heart beating. Slowly, persistently, he descended into the central spine of the cruiser, past the watch vaults and the suspended cryotombs where other custodians slept, ready to be awakened only in moments of galactic extremis. He passed them in silence. None stirred, not even those trained to sense anomalies through gyne reflex alone. But he felt it, the shift, not in air pressure, not in heat, but in relevance. As if he had ceased to be in a ship and begun to move through a memory, someone else's. The vault of ash was not meant to be opened without direct Terragrade clearance. It had not been unsealed since the War of the Beast. It held fragments bedeased texts, weapons, sometimes words that even the Inquisition dared not name. It was warded with ancient sigils, so potent that servitors deactivated permanently when brought too close. But the vault was already open, not breached, not destroyed. Open. From the inside, its stone doors were split evenly, an architectural miracle that not even Mechanicus tech could have performed without days of work and multi-clade cooperation. Yet the edges were untouched, smooth. He found the source of the hum, a sarcophagus, no glyphs, no seals, just a slab of obsidian black metal, unmarked, untouched by decay or time, hovering and humming. It pulsed to the rhythm of his own heart. Or perhaps his heart was matching its rhythm. He couldn't tell anymore. Time blurred in its presence. Minutes stretched. Seconds stuttered. As he approached, his vision darkened at the edges. Not pain, not fatigue, recognition. He had seen this sarcophagus before, in a vision, on the day he first placed his palm on the golden gate of the throne world and was remade into something more than man. They had called it a test, a spiritual illusion, a necessary hallucination. But now, here it was real, a memory made steel. He reached out, not to touch, but to acknowledge, to confirm that he still had agency in this dream, that the echo had not swallowed him yet, and the sarcophagus responded, not with words, with presence, an overwhelming sensation of scale, as if something vast had just noticed him. A cold gaze, ancient and sorrowful, folding around him like gravity. No speech, just one idea poured into his mind like molten lead into a mold that had always been shaped like him. We are not your enemy. We are your origin. Valkar fell to one knee, not out of reverence, out of instinct, and the sarcophagus began to open. There was no hiss of steam, no grind of ancient gears. The sarcophagus opened not like a machine, but like an idea becoming clear. A seam appeared not carved, not welded, but revealed, running its length, lightless and perfect. The hum ceased, and for a moment, Valkar wished it hadn't, because when the silence came, it was complete. Not the quiet of space, not even the ritual stillness of the palace vaults. This silence pressed inward. It crushed breath. It made you aware of your heartbeat in a way that felt intrusive, almost shameful. The sense that the very act of being was now under scrutiny. The lid slid apart inside. There was no body, only a mirror, perfect, unbroken, framed by circuitry that bore no visible connection to the sarcophagus's outer shell. It hovered, levitating within the cradle, suspended in gravity not its own. The surface reflected nothing, no room, no light, not even Valkar's golden warplate. But when he stepped closer, it reflected him. Not the man he was now, not the gene-wrought warrior in eternal service to the throne, but a boy, Terran thin, starving, eyes wide, not with hope, but fear. His own eyes. Valkar staggered back. The mirror followed, not physically, but in perception. No matter where he stood in the room, it remained centered in his gaze. Not a trick of design, a choice. The artifact had chosen to be seen, and it was showing him something. Images rippled across the surface, not flashes. Not chaos, but ordered memory. Planets, cities, vaults beneath oceanic crusts. Cultures that rose and burned before the age of strife, before the birth of the Imperium. Some bore the sigil of mankind, others did not. Some resembled human architecture, twisted into spiral-lobed cathedrals and inverted pyramids. Others bore no geometry at all, just rhythm, pulse, intent. Then he saw Selenac Prime, but not as it was, as it had been. A garden world, yes, but older than the stars charted on imperial maps. A world not colonized, but chosen, altered, hollowed, not as prison, but as cradle. Beneath its soil, long before the Mechanicus, had been a vault of memory, not digital, not psychic, but living, and something had stirred it. He had stirred it. Varric, the guardsman, the survivor, the catalyst. The mirror pulsed, and then came the vision. Not an image, not even a thought, but a state. As if the ship around him ceased to exist, and he stood alone in a field of stars, watching them drip. Not move, not burn, drip like water from a fractured ceiling, pooling into a shape that was almost a man, a titan formed of absence, eyes like event horizons, hands folded, not in prayer but restraint, and around it, "We are your consequence." The presence turned slowly, and Valkar saw in its silhouette the outline of something familiar. The Aquila, not whole, not imperial, but broken, one wing shattered, the other malformed, a symbol born in error, not triumph. The echo grew louder. You carved your empire into the bones of forgetting. You murdered the past and called it loyalty. Now the tide returns, and you have no shoreline. Then the stars shuddered, and the vision broke. Valkar gasped. He was on the floor. The sarcophagus was sealed. Again, the mirror gone, but the echo remained. Not in the room. In him, he could still feel the shape of the vision behind his eyes, like an afterimage of a light never seen. And deeper still, he could feel the gaze, watching, waiting, not hostile, but inevitable. His vox bead crackled, a voice he did not expect, the ship's chronomagus, honored custodian. An anomaly has occurred. We have exited the warp, but not by calculation. Pause. Coordinates place us above Terra. Valkar stood slowly, the taste of iron in his mouth. Terra. Already, that couldn't be. They had not even been halfway through the warp passage, but the voice continued, unaffected. Our orbit is stationary, but the surface is dark. No lights, no beacons, no signal. Observation towers. Silent. Another pause. The throne is not responding. Valkar did not answer, because even before the mirror, even before the sarcophagus, before Selene, he had already known. The echo always reaches home. The bridge of the Aegis soul was not designed for chaos. Its layout was sacred geometry. Precisely measured distances between command thrones, Mechanicus pylons, and custodian control alcoves. Every movement had ritual meaning. Every cable and conduit was sanctified with oil and prayer. It was a space where decisions of galactic magnitude were made with the stillness of monks, unshakable, absolute. But now, the quiet had changed. Valkar stepped onto the bridge and felt it immediately. The air was wrong. Not stale, not poisoned, but expectant. Like breath held too long. Like a cathedral waiting for judgment. The viewport displayed Terra, or something that wore its shape. It looked like Earth, the curvature, the oceans, the rusted ring of orbital debris that had hung above the throne world since the Great Crusade. But the lights were gone. The massive, continent-spanning hive cities that once pulsed with industry and faith, the polar gate station, even the Astronomican's golden blaze, visible from orbit for 10,000 years, extinguished. The planet slept, or it hid. The Chronomagus stood beside the starboard shrine station, her mechanical limbs folded tight against her robed frame. She did not look up. Time fracture confirmed, she said flatly. Jump duration, 98 seconds. Distance traveled, 7,000 light years. Standard deviation, absolute. Translation, they had crossed the warp in seconds. No storm, no Gellerfield anomaly. No trace of demonic presence. Something had moved them. Valkar approached the viewport. His visor filtered the glare of the dying sun, the false warmth of Terra's aging star. He focused on Segmentum Solar's heart Mount Everest, the golden throne. There was no fire, no smoke, no ruin, just stillness, as if the entire surface of the planet had exhaled once and never breathed again. A soft chime. Transmission, said the Chronomagus. Valkar turned slowly from Terra. Yes. She didn't press play. She looked at him. Human eyes behind augmented lenses. For the first time, he saw uncertainty. Not fear, not awe, but that subtle, shaking pause, the kind that came when a priest stood before the relic they'd worshipped their whole life, only to find it cold. He gave the nod. The bridge filled with sound, no vox static, no distortion, just clarity. A voice, male, old, familiar, too familiar. You are late. Valkar's blood turned to ice because the voice was his, not similar, not close. His, the same cadence, the same Terran dialect. The same precise control forged in the palace training domes. The voice continued. We've waited long enough. The echo must complete. The cycle must end. The memory is not a curse, is the only salvation left. We burned the truth once, but now it burns back. A second voice joined it. Female. Female. Also his. The same breath, but now it laughed. We remember you, all of you. Every version, every fragment scattered through time and doctrine. You wear gold like armor and call it duty. But beneath the plating, you are the same terrified child, Arion Val, still kneeling at the altar of a god who never answered. The audio cut. Silence returned, then a soft whisper through the comes. Do you remember the sun? The bridge darkened outside. Terra flickered, not exploded, not vanished, flickered, like a faulty lumen strip in a tomb that had forgotten it held the dead. The clouds broke, not in storm, but in order. Hexagonal gaps, measured, deliberate, and from beneath the planet's crust, something moved. Valkar gripped the hilt of his guardian spear, not out of fear, but to anchor himself, because he now understood what the mirror had shown him they had not. Found a new threat. They had awakened the first one. The echo wasn't a message, it was a return, the sound of a truth, old to die, a memory that could no longer be buried beneath gold. The Custodes were forged to withstand heresy, but this was not heresy, this was truth, the kind that couldn't be purged by fire, or sealed behind vault doors, or locked in an inquisitorial black cell. This was truth that outlived gods, truth with roots deeper than the warp, a memory so vast it had become myth, and so dangerous that the Imperium chose to forget it existed. But forgetting does not unmake. And now, Terra was remembering. Valkar issued the full mobilization protocol. Automated klaxons rang out across the Aegis, saw no fear, no urgency, only ritual. One by one, the sleeping Custodes awoke from stasis, rising like statues, emerging from time's river. Gold armor hissed to life. Power cores ignited. Each custodian stepped into the world, not with hesitation, but with the certainty of those who were bred to die with their eyes open. But as they assembled, something shifted. Their oaths held, but their certainty did not. Many had seen it already in their dreams, in the sarcophagi that whispered beneath the decks, in the subtle warping of time around their thoughts, a fracture, not of faith, but of origin. Like discovering the emperor's face, in every monument was a mask, layered over something far older, not darkness, not light, just memory. As they formed ranks on the deck, the stars above Terra continued to blink out, not one by one, but in clusters patterns. A glyph was being carved into the void, not for the Imperium, not for chaos, something else, something that had always existed in silence. The Mechanicus Magi fell to their knees, not in reverence, in resignation. The eldest among them, Magos Aranthus, pulled the steel hood from his face and spoke aloud in words not heard since before the age of strife. We have found the Ark beneath the throne. The silence was not failure, it was a lock. Valkar approached him. What is coming? Aranthus turned, his synthetic eyes weeping a thin stream of coolant. Not coming, he whispered. Waking. At that moment, the planet below sighed, a sound with no direction, no source, as if the crust itself had released tension, and with it, a fracture raced across Terra's surface, visible even from orbit, not chaotic, not random, a circle encircling the golden throne, and from its center, a new light rose, not golden, not holy, cold, white, silent, and it was not the Stronomicn. Valkar felt his armor grow heavier, not with weight, with pressure. Every word of his gene code screamed with ancestral memory, things locked away since the day of his echoes of a time when Earth was still Earth, when men chose to forget what they had unearthed beneath the Himalayan mountains, because what the Emperor had entombed there was not a corpse, it was a gate. The vox flared, no voice, just one sound, a bell dot. Not the ecclesiarchies, not the mechanicuses, a single, low tone, deeper than logic, older than sound. The same bell that had rung on Selenac Prime. Valkar turned to his brothers. Some stood ready, blades high, eyes like fire. Some trembled, but all knew the golden throne had been a seal. And now, the seal was breaking. He lifted his spear knot toward Terra, not in defiance, but in acknowledgement, because whatever walked out of that light would not be stopped by weapons. It would not speak, it would not rule, it would only remember, and in its memory, the Imperium would see itself, not as it believed it was, but as it had always been, a shadow cast by something it had once buried. Now rising, soft transition to Chapter 3, the hollow throne beneath the surface of Terra. In a chamber older than language, something moved within the bedrock, not breathing, not waking, remembering. And across the Imperium, psychers screamed in unison, not from pain, but from recognition. The throne was never empty, it had only been forgotten. Terra was never meant to be silent, not the cradle of mankind, not the heart of the Imperium that spanned 1,000,000 worlds. Its skies had always hummed with void traffic and orbital relays. Its continents trembled under the weight of hive cities, so vast they bent weather patterns. Even its oceans murmured with the churn of underwater forge line. Noise was faith, movement was life, but now all was still. From orbit, Terra looked like a relic, a cathedral sealed shut, a planet turned inward, and within that hush, something old began to rise. Beneath the crust, beyond the throne chambers, deeper than any data slate dared record, lay the first vault, not a prison, not a tomb, a boundary, carved before the age of records, before the old night, before even the first navigators opened their third eyes to the warp and found it staring back. No door marked the entrance. It did not need one. The vault was sealed, not by locks, but by forgetting, and forgetting, now, had failed. The last of the seals fell without a sound, and light bloomed within, not light in the human sense, not photons, not energy, but memory made visible. A flood of moments never lived, yet deeply known. As the chamber awakened, its walls shimmered with images, empires that came before stars, civilizations that seeded galaxies like gardens, voices that spoke not with sound, but with consent. And at the center of it all, a throne, not the golden throne, that was a mimic, a placeholder. This one was not made of gold or bone or forgotten technologies. It was made of absence, carved from a mineral that should not exist, shaped like an invitation no one remembered receiving. And seated upon it was a shape, not alive, not dead, not asleep. Remembering, it had no name, only titles that rusted when spoken aloud. Some would have called it the Mekhet, others might say it was the first mind, the echo of what mankind once was. Before it chose gods instead of itself, it stirred, not with movement, but with attention. And above, in the hollow tower where the golden throne still sat, the corpse of the emperor, bound to tubes and heresy and 1,000,000 prayers, shuddered for the first time in 10,000 years. his hand moved, not a twitch, a grasp. The attending tech priests exploded into static, their implants overloading in a silent shriek of binary as raw psychic force ignited the sanctum. Gold-leafed walls curled inward like paper. Vox grills melted, icons of the imperial creed shattered, and the custodians who guarded the throne fell to their knees, spears clattering to the marble like children's toys, not out of loyalty, out of recognition, because something was rising from beneath the emperor, not beneath his throne. Beneath him, an image, coiled like a shadow, emerged through his very bones, projected upward from the planet's core like a memory reclaiming its host. The emperor screamed, not aloud, not in pain, but psychically across all of Terra. A scream not of agony, but clarity. It raced outward from the palace, slicing through the warp like a blade of forgotten language. Every psyker on the planet dropped dead. Every astropath aboard the Aegis Soul fell silent, their eyes bleeding ink-black tears. The Astronomicon, dark for days, flickered once bright and whitened, then turned inward, as if reversed through time, and at the heart of the vault, the Mechit stood, not rose-stood, because it had always been standing, and its voice was not sound, not speech, it was permission, a permission that resonated through every strand of the Emperor's shattered soul. Not a possession, not a replacement, a return outside. Terra changed, not physically. METAPHYSICALLY. The very idea of the planet bent, and a new law emerged, an older truth, not of faith, not of dominion, but of remembrance. Every monument cracked not from pressure, from honesty. The past had come home, and the future had no place to hide. The walls of the imperial palace did not fall. They shed like a serpent molting skin. The ancient bastions of mankind's supposed eternity peeled away in thin, spiraling flakestone, steel, plasteel, adamantium, all coming apart in graceful silence. Not destruction, revelation. The core structures remained, but they no longer looked Terran, no longer imperial. Vaults once thought to house sacred archives now shimmered with architecture that defied angle or symmetry. Staircases looped in Askyrian spirals. Pillars rose and fell like liquid thought. The central spires no longer reached up, but inward. Custodians stood witness to this undoing. Some fired. Their bolters rang out in ceremonial defiance, hurling mass reactive shells into the shifting stone. No impact, no resistance. The rounds phased through reality as if the world had grown bored of their physics. Others knelt, not in reverence, in surrender to knowing, because every custodian, every true one, had seen glimpses of this place in their earliest gene memory. A hallway in a dream, a star that wasn't a star, a door that never opened. Until now, Valkar stood at the edge of the throne sanctum. What remained of the Emperor's body lay, suspended above the shattered throne, no longer flesh, not quite energy. His form flickered, stuttered, multiplied. One moment a husk, the next a figure of unbearable radiance, then a shadow of something other, not divine, not demonic, a convergence. He spoke no lungs, no tongue, but every being on Terra heard it, even the dead. I was not first. Valkar dropped to a knee, not from command, but gravity narrative, gravity. the weight of a sentence that shattered 10,000 years of loyalty. I was built upon what was buried, a crown upon a skull no one dared name. The ground split, not in quake, but division. Time itself folded downward, revealing catacombs that were never dug, only revealed. Beneath them, the vault pulsed with slow, patient rhythm, and walking through it, now ascending the unseen stairs of memory, came the Mike Het. It was him, and not him it, wore the echo of the Emperor's youthful, golden-skinned, burning eyes, but only as an interface, a familiar face for those still tethered to the past. Beneath the illusion shimmered a form too complex to retain shape, a figure composed of thought, history, and consequence. It looked at Valkar. You were never meant to serve. That broke him, not from doubt, not betrayal, but because he already knew. He had known since Selenak Prime, since the statues, since the mirror. Deep down, beneath the oaths, beneath the armor, beneath the conditioning, a truth preserved like a fossil inside a cathedral. The Custodes were not guardians of the Emperor. They were reminders of what the galaxy had tried to forget. The Meket stepped forward, its voice not heard, but remembered decode through every cell of Valkar's body. You are not gold. You are ash. Outside, Terra's gravity began to flex. Orbit shifted. The Aegis soul reported it immediately. Tides of psychic mass spiraling from the planet, like breath from a long-held lung. But there was no panic, no Geller distortion, just awakening. The Astronomicon flared once more, not with light, but music, not melody. Structure, a code so ancient it predated binary. A pattern meant not to guide ships, but to unfold thought. Valkar stood. He turned to his brothers, to the other custodians gathered in silence. This is not the end. His voice cracked not from fear, but memory. This is before the beginning. And behind him, the Meket smiled, not in victory, not in malice, but with something that resembled relief, because the galaxy had remembered itself, and now it would no longer lie. Not metaphorically literal. Across the segmentum solar, every astropath who could still draw breath began to report the same impossible phenomenon. Constellations shifting, not drifting through natural movement, not skewed by warp flux. They were rearranging themselves. Across the sky, suns blinked like ancient code, forming runes too vast to be seen from any one world, legible only to those who stood far enough away or high enough above to recognize the geometry of grief. And at the center of it all was Terra. The old throne, now cracked open like a chrysalis, had shed its final mask. The Emperor's body, that godlike husk, no longer mattered. It had been scaffold, a vessel for belief, a dam built to hold back an ocean of memory. But now that ocean had crested. The Meket stood in the glow of that rising tide. Above, within the ruins of the Astronomicon's prism vault, the light shifted again, not back to gold, not to the blinding white of warp energy, but to a deeper hue, a subtractive light, the color of what comes after fire, after faith, after silence. And in that light, the throne cracked open, not like a machine, like a seed. Valkar stood at the edge of it, no longer armored in certainty. His spear was still in hand, but now it felt ornamentally an echo of a role that no longer existed. He stepped forward, toward the me, Khet. He expected command, clarity, revelation instead. He received a question, not spoken, not even formed into words, just offered, like a mirror held to the soul. "What are you without purpose?" Valkar faltered, not from doubt, but because there was no answer. He had never been taught to live without mission, without directive, without need. Custodians were designed to stand, to guard, to hold the line. But now the line was gone. The walls had moved. The map had redrawn itself, and still the Mekhet waited, not demanding dot, just present, watching him try to remember what it meant to be human behind him. The others stirred, Custodes, Magi, servitors, flickering in and out of awareness. Even the AI core of the Aegis soul, once bound in strict limitation, began to sing, a low-frequency hum harmonizing with the layering thought atop thought like a choir that had waited millennia for its cue. And above it all, the throne spoke again, this time with many voices, not the Emperor, not the Mekhet, but the ones before, voices that sang in a rhythm of impossible age, saying not words, but understanding that this was not collapse, this was recollection. The galaxy had turned away from itself for too long, chosen obedience over knowledge, chosen order over consequence, chosen gold over grief. Now, the grief had returned, and with it freedom. The chamber trembled not in fear, but in release. Every locked door in the Imperial Palace unsealed. Every buried archive surfaced. Across the globe, entire districts of Terra restructured themselves, no longer held in the artificial gravity of empire, but in the natural pull of memory. The stars above flared again, finalizing their shape. One word, not Gothic, not high, can't, older than language, a word that meant sorrow, origin, and possibility. It could not be translated, only felt, and across the Imperium, those who still had eyes to seethe, those unbroken by dogma or blind hatred, felt it, the cry of something long buried, not by time, but by choice, and now it was awake. The transmission reached Hydrafer first, then Armageddon, then Nocturne, across the segmentum solar. Astropaths wept blood as the signal passed through them, not a message, but a revelation. Not encoded, not deliberate, a pulse, a ripple in reality so vast that it passed through Geller fields like they weren't there. And what it carried wasn't doctrine. It wasn't a call to arms. It was absence. Every librarian of the Adeptus Astartes felt it. Every sanctioned soul tuned even slightly to the sea of souls, emptied, not silenced, unmade, within the sanctum of the Librarius Omnis on Macragge. A single ultramarine's epistolary collapsed mid-mantra. His mouth foamed with words never meant for mortals. Eyes wide as a single sentence forced itself through his consciousness. We were never supposed to remember. In the depths of Mars, the data forges of the Fabricator General stuttered. The Omnissiah's most sacred processes, the rite of true circuitry, the machine litany of function halted without cause. Deep beneath the Noctilith layers, in tomb vaults long sealed and utterly forgotten, cogitator banks began to write not code, memory, fragments of pre-imperial design, schematics with curves that defied Mechanicus logic, equations that ran off the edge of the slate, not spoken for 30,000 years, some not even TERRAN above them. The red priests screamed, not in pain, in recognition. Back on Terra, the Mechit walked the corridors of the palace, alone yet seen. He passed through time-worn halls that no longer existed in the present tense. Everywhere he stepped, walls reshaped, doors slid aside without opening, thrones melted into blank stone. He did not walk with purpose. A piece of the past returned, not his past, ours, the forgotten truth of mankind, before it crowned itself in suffering and called it glory, before it shattered its history and scattered it like bones across the stars, before it built its soul around a throne of lies. And with every step, the silence deepened, not a quiet of absence, a tithe that was what the echo demanded, not worship, not obedience, silence, the ability to witness truth without the desperate, squawking instinct to reshape it into something safe. His custodian brothers behind him, forming no guard formation, issuing no challenge. Their loyalty had not changed, but the context of it had. They were not protectors of an emperor. They were protectors of a story. And now that story was changing. The echo was rewriting the ending. Outside, the void was no longer stable. Stars pulsed in the rhythms of the Astronomicon, but not as before. Its light was no longer navigational. It was reflective, a psychic mirror of thought. The Imperium's dreams now had consequence, and not all dreams were noble. On Cadia's shattered remnants, black-robed wanderers rose from fissures where no human should live. They did not speak, they only listened, to the wind, to the warp, to the bones of the planet. The Blood Angels' sanguinary priests began weeping over empty chalices. The blood they drew had no taste, no life, just memory. And on Komorafar, from the Emperor's light, something laughed, not mockery, not joy. The laugh of a prisoner who sees his jailer. Remember, the key was always inside the cell, because the echo did not just touch the Imperium. It was older than it. It belonged to everything.